After 30 years of building her home, she lost it all, until a hidden cabin changed everything. Lillian Hart stood in the doorway of the house she had rebuilt with her own hands, and for a moment, it felt like she was looking into someone else's life. The floors still held the marks of her work. The kitchen still carried the scent she planted there. But the papers had already decided. None of it was hers anymore. What she didn't know was that someone had been preparing for this long before it happened. Have you ever lost something you thought could never be taken from you? Lillian Hart stood in the doorway and didn't step inside. The screen door creaked faintly behind her, shifting in the late afternoon breeze. She had fixed that hinge herself years ago, tightening the screws until the frame stopped sagging. It used to close clean. Now it dragged just a little, like the house had grown tired without telling her. 2 suitcases sat on the porch behind her. Old ones. Not the kind you buy for trips. The kind you keep because they've already survived too much to throw away. Inside, the house looked the same. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The hardwood floors still held the soft glow she had worked into them over weeks. Sanding, staining, sealing, repeating, until her hands shook when she tried to hold a brush. The kitchen window still caught the light at that same angle, letting it spill across the counter in a slow, golden stretch. Somewhere deeper in the house, the faint smell of rosemary lingered, mixed with varnish and the clean edge of lemon oil. Everything was exactly as she had left it, and none of it felt like hers. Lillian. Conrad's voice came from the hallway, calm as ever, even now. She turned slightly, enough to see him without stepping in. He stood about 6 feet away, just past the archway that led toward the living room. One hand lifted to his wrist, adjusting his watch the way he always did when he was preparing to say something measured, something controlled. He didn't look angry. He didn't look relieved either. He looked settled, like a man finishing paperwork. "The agreement is final," he said. Not unkindly, not warmly, just stated. It's all been reviewed, signed. There's nothing more to go over. Lillian nodded once, not because she agreed, because she understood what kind of moment this was. The kind where talking doesn't change anything. She glanced past him, deeper into the house. The dining room table sat exactly where it always had. The same table she had dragged home from a roadside sale, sanded down in the driveway, and refinished until the grain came back to life. She could still see the faint line near one corner where she'd slipped with the scraper. A small mistake. One she never fixed, because it reminded her the table had been touched by real hands. Her hands. "Take what you need," Conrad said, following her gaze. "Within the terms. Within the terms." The words landed quietly. Lillian turned back toward the porch, looking at the 2 suitcases again. One of them wasn't even full. There wasn't much left to take that hadn't already been decided for her. She stepped inside. Just one step. The floor responded the way it always had. A soft creak near the threshold, then silence. She had learned every sound in this house over the years. Which boards needed pressure, which ones shifted slightly in the humidity, which corners held cold longer than the rest in winter. The house knew her. Or at least, it used to. She moved slowly through the entryway, her fingers brushing the wall without thinking. The paint was still smooth. 2 coats. She remembered the second one because she'd stayed up until nearly 2 in the morning to finish it before the morning light came through and showed every uneven line. She paused at the kitchen doorway. The light was there, exactly where it always fell. Late afternoon, soft, low, stretching across the counter toward the sink. For a moment, her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She almost reached for a dish towel, almost checked the stove, almost moved like she still belonged in the rhythm of this space. Then she stopped. Because something inside her had already shifted. Behind her, Conrad cleared his throat lightly. "I'll be upstairs," he said. "Let me know if you need anything clarified." Clarified. Another careful word. Lillian didn't respond. She stepped fully into the kitchen instead, letting the quiet settle around her. The refrigerator hummed softly. A clock ticked somewhere on the wall, steady and indifferent. She placed her hand on the edge of the counter. The surface was cool, solid, real. She closed her eyes for just a second. Not long enough to feel anything fully, just long enough to notice that the feeling wasn't coming the way it used to. When she opened them again, the room hadn't changed. Of course it hadn't. That wasn't how loss worked. It didn't rearrange the furniture. It didn't dim the light. It didn't take the smell of rosemary out of the air. It just removed you from it. Piece by piece. Until one day, you were standing in your own doorway, looking in, and realizing there was nothing inside that could prove you had ever been the one who made it all hold together. Lillian turned back toward the front of the house. The suitcases were still there. Waiting. She walked toward them slowly, her footsteps quiet against the floor she had once restored board by board. At the threshold, she paused again, her hand resting against the doorframe. For a brief moment, she looked back. Not at Conrad, not at anything specific. Just the space, the light, the table, the walls. 30 years. Held together in silence. Then she stepped out onto the porch. The screen door pulled closed behind her with that same soft drag she had never quite fixed. And this time, she didn't turn back. The porch boards creaked under her weight as she stepped down, one hand resting briefly on the railing she had rebuilt after a storm split the original wood clean down the middle. The late afternoon air felt heavier outside, warmer than it should have been for that hour. Lillian picked up one suitcase, then the other. They were lighter than she expected. That unsettled her more than anything else. She placed them in the back seat of her car, closed the door gently, and stood there for a moment with her hand still on the handle. The house sat behind her, quiet, still. The same as it had always been. Only now it didn't ask anything of her. That was new. 2 days later, she sat in a narrow office above a bakery on Main Street. The place smelled faintly of sugar and burnt coffee drifting up through the floorboards. The walls were lined with metal shelves stacked with folders, each labeled in careful handwriting. A small fan rotated lazily in the corner, pushing warm air from one side of the room to the other, without much effect. Across the desk, her attorney adjusted a pair of reading glasses and flipped through a thick stack of documents. "Lillian," she said gently, tapping one page with a pen. "I want to walk you through how the ownership was structured over time. Some of these changes happened gradually." Gradually. Lillian nodded. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers loosely interlocked. There was a faint line of dust still caught beneath one fingernail. She had noticed it that morning, but hadn't bothered to clean it out. The attorney turned the first page. "This is the original purchase. Both names are listed here. Joint ownership, equal standing." Lillian leaned forward slightly, her eyes tracing the lines. She remembered that day. The closing office had smelled like carpet cleaner and stale air. Conrad had been the one asking questions. She had been the one imagining where the light would fall in the kitchen. Her name was there. Clear. Undeniable. The attorney flipped forward. Now, this is where things begin to shift. A new set of documents. Refinancing paperwork. Terms, conditions, adjustments. There was a restructuring about 8 years in, the attorney continued. Primary borrower designation changed here. Lillian frowned slightly. I remember refinancing, she said. Her voice sounded distant, like it had to travel farther than usual to reach the room. Interest rates were better. Conrad said it would make things easier. It often does, the attorney replied carefully, but it also changes how ownership is interpreted legally. Lillian looked back down at the page. Her signature was there. She recognized it immediately. The way the L curved slightly too wide. The quick finish at the end, like she had been in a hurry. What does that line mean? She asked, pointing to a section she didn't recognize. The attorney followed her finger. That establishes him as the primary financial contributor moving forward. Lillian blinked. I paid for the kitchen renovation that year, she said, almost to herself. Out of my savings. I remember because the contractor wanted half up front. The attorney nodded. I'm not disputing that, she said. But legally, the documentation ties financial responsibility to him after this point. Lillian leaned back in her chair. The fan clicked as it rotated. She stared at the papers, then looked away. Her mind didn't stay in the office. It moved somewhere else. A memory surfaced without warning. The kitchen floor, unfinished. Boards stripped down to raw wood. She was on her knees, sanding by hand, because the rented machine had left uneven marks near the edges. It was late, past midnight. The house was quiet except for the slow drag of sandpaper against grain. Her shoulders had ached. Her hands had gone numb more than once, but she had kept going because the morning light would show every flaw. She had wanted it right. Not perfect. Just right. Lillian? She blinked and looked up. The attorney was watching her. Are you okay to continue? Lillian nodded again. Yes. Another page turned. This is a home equity adjustment, the attorney said, about 15 years in. More signatures. More terms. More language that felt removed. There are several of these, the attorney added. Each one shifts a portion of documented value under his name. Documented, Lillian repeated quietly. The word sat there between them. Heavy. She leaned forward again, this time more slowly. Her eyes moved from one page to another. Dates. Numbers. Initials in the margins. Her initials. Always there. Always present. And yet, something didn't match. I don't remember this one, she said, tapping a document near the middle of the stack. The attorney glanced at it. It was bundled with a set of insurance updates, she explained, likely presented as part of a routine review. Routine. Lillian let out a small breath. She could see it now. The kitchen table. Papers spread out in neat stacks. Conrad standing beside her, turning pages, pointing where to sign. It's just housekeeping, he had said once. Keeps everything clean. The word lingered. She looked back down at the documents. For the first time, she wasn't just reading them. She was comparing them. Dates against memory. Signatures against moments. What was said. against what was written. Her chest tightened slightly. Not from panic, from something slower. A quiet alignment. The attorney closed the folder gently. "I know this is difficult," she said, "but legally, the court relies on what can be proven through these records." Lillian nodded. She understood that now, more clearly than she wanted to. She glanced down at her hands. Still. Steady. But something inside them had changed. Not the strength, the direction. She looked back up. "So none of the work I did," she began, then stopped. The attorney didn't interrupt. Lillian finished the thought carefully. "None of that exists here?" The attorney hesitated, then answered honestly, "Not in a way the court recognizes." Silence settled in the room. The fan clicked again. Outside, somewhere below, a door slammed and voices drifted up faintly from the street. Lillian sat there, looking at the stack of papers. Her life. Reduced, organized, signed. She reached out and touched the top page, lightly, as if testing whether it was real. It was. Of course it was. That was the problem. Because everything she remembered, the floors, the walls, the garden, the long nights, the small decisions that made the house feel alive, none of that had a place here. No line, no column, no signature that proved it had ever been hers. Lillian pulled her hand back slowly. Then she sat up straighter in the chair. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just differently. As if she had shifted her weight onto something more solid. The papers didn't change, but the way she was looking at them did. And for the first time since she walked out of that house, she wasn't just remembering. She was beginning to question. The office felt smaller now. Not physically, but like the air had thickened around the edges of everything she thought she understood. Lillian stood up slowly, gathering her purse without rushing. The attorney said something about making copies, about next steps, about options. Lillian nodded at the right moments. She heard the words, but they didn't settle anywhere yet. Because something else had already started. A quiet sorting. Not of papers. Of moments. That evening, she sat in a small rented room above a hardware store on the edge of town. The carpet smelled faintly of dust and detergent. A single lamp cast a soft yellow circle on the table beside her. She hadn't unpacked much. Just a few clothes, a photograph she hadn't decided whether to look at yet, and her purse. The rest stayed in the suitcases. Waiting. Lillian sat at the edge of the bed, hands resting on her knees. Still. Then she leaned back slowly and closed her eyes, and let the past come forward on its own. It hadn't started with anything obvious, no arguments, no betrayals she could point to and say, "There, that was the moment." It had been smaller. The first time she noticed, they had been hosting dinner. 6 people, neighbors and one couple Conrad was trying to impress. Something about a listing, a property that needed the right atmosphere. The dining room had been warm that night. Candlelight placed just so, soft enough to blur the corners of the room. Lillian had adjusted the placement twice before anyone arrived, watching how the shadows moved across the walls. She had chosen the paint color after weeks of testing samples in different light. Not too bright, not too dull, something that held the room together without demanding attention. One of the guests had noticed. "This feels different," the woman said, looking around slowly. Not staged, lived in, but intentional. Lillian had smiled. She was about to explain how the light shifted in the afternoon, how the wood tones needed balancing, how the space worked best when it wasn't trying too hard. But Conrad spoke first. "We worked hard on it," he said easily, leaning back in his chair. Lillian paused. Just for a second. It didn't feel wrong. Not exactly. They had both lived there, shared the space, built a life inside it. She let it go. The second time it felt different. They were standing in the kitchen with a client. A man in his 50s, sharp suit, eyes that moved quickly over everything, like he was measuring value in real time. He ran his hand along the edge of the counter. "Who redesigned this?" he asked. Lillian opened her mouth. Conrad didn't wait. "That was part of the overall vision," he said, stepping slightly forward. "We wanted something that felt open, but still grounded." The client nodded, impressed. Lillian stood beside the sink, her hand resting on the cool porcelain. She had spent 3 weekends reworking that layout. Moving cabinets, rerouting plumbing, measuring everything twice because the old walls weren't straight. She had stood exactly where Conrad was standing now, staring at the space before it existed, trying to imagine how it could. She said nothing. Because interrupting would feel unnecessary. That's what she told herself. After that, it happened more often. Not suddenly. Not all at once, just gradually. At gatherings, Conrad began to speak earlier, more confidently, filling in explanations before she could offer them. At first, he included her. "We thought, we decided." Then the language shifted. "I wanted. I designed." Lillian noticed. Of course she noticed. But noticing didn't always lead to action. Sometimes it led to adjustment. She told herself it was easier this way, that he was better with people, that it didn't matter who said the words, as long as the house spoke for itself. Then came the paperwork connected to his business. The first time he asked for her help, it had seemed harmless. Just a brochure. "Warm it up a little," he had said, placing a stack of photos on the kitchen table. "You know how to make it feel like something." Lillian sat down that night with a pen and a notepad. She looked at the images, empty rooms, cold lighting, spaces that felt expensive but lifeless. She rewrote everything. Descriptions that sounded like someone might actually want to live there. Morning light in the kitchen. Footsteps in the hallway. The quiet kind of comfort people don't know they're looking for until they see it. She handed it back the next day. Conrad read it, smiled, kissed the top of her head. "Perfect," he said. The brochure went out. The client signed within the week. Lillian didn't think much of it, until she saw the final version printed. Her words exactly. But at the bottom, creative direction by Conrad Hale. She stared at it longer than she meant to. Not because she was angry, because something didn't line up. She had done the work. That much was clear. But the credit had shifted. Cleanly, quietly, like it belonged there. After that, the requests increased, listing descriptions, presentation materials, handwritten notes to clients that sounded more personal, more thoughtful. "Just your touch," Conrad would say. "You make things feel real." And she did. Every time. She stayed up late at the kitchen table, shaping words the way she shaped rooms. Carefully, intentionally. And every time the finished product carried his name, Lillian leaned forward on the bed, her eyes opening slowly. The room around her came back into focus. The lamp, the table, the faint hum of something electrical in the wall. She exhaled. Long, steady. It hadn't been one moment. It had been a pattern, one she had seen, one she had understood, but never stopped. Because each piece, on its own, had been easy to explain, easy to forgive, easy to ignore, until there were too many to hold together. Lillian stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, the street was quiet. A single car passed, headlights sliding across the pavement before disappearing around the corner. She rested her hand against the glass. Cool, solid. Real. Just like the counter in her kitchen had been. Just like the floors. The walls. Everything she had touched. Everything that no longer carried her name. She closed her eyes again. But this time the memories didn't come softly. They came sharper, clearer. Not just what had happened, but how it had happened. And for the first time, she didn't look at those moments as isolated. She saw them as steps, leading somewhere she hadn't realized she was being taken, until she arrived, with nothing left to prove she had ever built anything at all. The memory didn't stop there. It shifted. Further back. To a road she hadn't driven in years. The farmhouse sat low against the land, tucked between two slow-sloping hills where the wind always seemed to pass through softer than anywhere else. The gravel driveway hadn't changed much. Still uneven. Still edged with wild grass that grew where it wanted and refused to be trimmed into anything neat. Lillian parked beside the old fence and sat for a moment before getting out. The air smelled different here. Drier. With something underneath it. Lavender, maybe. Or something older that had soaked into the wood and never left. She stepped out of the car and closed the door gently, the sound carrying farther than it should have in the quiet. Her grandmother's house had never been loud. Even when it was full of people, it held its silence in a way that made everything feel deliberate. Lillian walked up the short path to the front porch. The boards dipped slightly near the middle, just as they always had. She remembered stepping around that spot as a child, thinking it might give way beneath her feet. It never did. The screen door opened before she knocked. Rosa Delgado stood there, one hand still on the handle, as if she had been waiting just on the other side. "You took your time," Rosa said, not unkindly. Lillian smiled faintly. "It's been busy." Rosa stepped aside to let her in. The house smelled the same. Dried herbs hung in small bundles near the window. The kitchen table was worn smooth at the center, the wood darkened by years of use. A kettle rested on the stove, not boiling, just there. Everything in the room felt used and kept. Rosa moved slowly but without hesitation, settling into the chair by the window where the light fell in a soft, steady line across the floor. "Sit," she said. Lillian did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was measured. Like Rosa was listening to something beyond the room before deciding what mattered enough to say out loud. Finally, Lillian reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "The inspection report," she said, placing it on the table, "for the house." Rosa didn't touch it. "Read it," Lillian added, unfolding the pages herself. "There's a lot. Roof damage, plumbing issues, electrical needs updating. The foundation in the back corner might need reinforcement." She listed the problems one by one. Numbers followed. Estimates. Costs that stretched further than she had expected when they first saw the place. Rosa listened, not interrupting, not reacting. When Lillian finished, the room fell quiet again. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees, brushing lightly against the window. Then Rosa spoke. "Did it feel like yours?" Lillian blinked. "What?" "The house," Rosa said, her voice steady. "When you stood in it, before all these numbers, before all these problems." Lillian hesitated. The memory came back quickly. The kitchen, the light, the way the air had settled around her like it recognized something. "Yes," she said finally, "it did." Rosa nodded once. "Then go back tomorrow." Lillian let out a small breath, half a laugh. "It's not that simple," she said. "We don't have the full amount. Even if we stretch everything, there's still a gap." Conrad went over it 3 times. Rosa didn't respond right away. Instead, she leaned slightly to the side and reached into a drawer built into the small cabinet beside her chair. It opened with a soft scrape, revealing a collection of envelopes, folded papers, and a few small objects wrapped in cloth. She took one envelope out, plain, unmarked, and placed it on the table between them. Lillian looked at it, then at her grandmother. "What is that?" "Open it." Lillian hesitated, then slid her finger beneath the flap and pulled out the contents. A check. She stared at the number, then looked up again. "Grandma, I can't take this." "You can," Rosa said simply. "I don't even know how I'd pay it back. It isn't a loan." The words settled heavily in the space between them. Lillian's grip tightened slightly on the paper. "I don't understand." Rosa leaned forward just enough to meet her eyes. "It's for you," she said. "Not for him. Not for the marriage. For you." Lillian felt something shift in her chest, a small, unfamiliar pressure. Rosa watched her for a moment longer, then reached out and placed her hand over Lillian's. Her skin was thin, warm, steady. "Keep records," she said quietly. "Everything you put into that place. Every dollar. Every hour. Write it down. Save it." Lillian frowned slightly. "Why?" Rosa's expression didn't change. "Because memory fades," she said, "and paper doesn't always tell the truth unless you make it." Lillian let out a breath, uncertain whether to laugh or argue. "Conrad handles most of that," she said. "He's good with numbers." Rosa's hand tightened just a fraction. "That's why you keep your own." The room went still again. Not tense, just aware. Lillian folded the check carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Thank you," she said softly. Rosa nodded, then leaned back into her chair. For a moment, it seemed like the conversation was over. Then Rosa reached into the drawer again. This time, she pulled out something smaller. Heavier. Wrapped in a short length of faded green thread. She placed it in Lillian's palm and closed her fingers around it. The metal was cold, solid. Lillian opened her hand slowly. An iron key, worn smooth along the edges. She looked up. "What is this?" Rosa didn't smile. "There's a place," she said, "past the mountain road, beyond the town where the gas station closes before dark. You won't find it unless you're looking for it." Lillian tilted her head slightly. "A place for what?" Rosa held her gaze. "For when you need it." The answer didn't explain anything. And yet, it stayed. Lillian turned the key over in her hand, feeling its weight. Why would I need something like this? Rosa didn't answer right away. She looked past Lillian, toward the window, where the light had shifted slightly as the afternoon moved forward. Then she spoke. Every woman should have one door in this world that no one else can close. The words settled quietly. No emphasis, no warning, just placed. Lillian slipped the key into her coat pocket without thinking. Not because she understood. Because something in the way it was given made it feel like refusing would be a mistake she couldn't explain later. They didn't speak much after that. The kettle warmed. The light moved. Time passed the way it always did in that house, without urgency. When Lillian finally stood to leave, Rosa didn't walk her to the door. She didn't need to. "Go back tomorrow," she said again. Lillian nodded. "I will." She stepped out onto the porch, the boards dipping slightly beneath her feet. The air had cooled just enough to carry the scent of something blooming somewhere out of sight. She reached into her pocket and touched the key again. Still there. Still solid. Still unexplained. As she walked back to her car, she told herself it was just something her grandmother kept. An old habit. A precaution that belonged to another time. She didn't question it. Not then. Because at that moment, the house was still hers. And the idea of needing another place felt unnecessary. The memory faded. The farmhouse, the key, the quiet certainty in Rosa's voice. All of it slipped back into the distance, where things lived when they hadn't yet proven themselves important. Lillian opened her eyes. The rented room came back into focus. The thin curtains, the dull carpet, the soft hum of the overhead light. For a moment, she sat there without moving, her hand resting lightly against her coat pocket. The key was still there. She could feel its shape without touching it, but she didn't take it out. Not yet. The next morning, she drove back. Not because she wanted to, because there were still things inside the house she needed to collect. Or at least, things the agreement allowed her to take. The street looked the same as always. Quiet, orderly. Lawns trimmed into careful shapes, mailboxes standing straight as if they had something to prove. Her car slowed as it approached the driveway. For a second, she considered not turning in, just driving past, leaving it all exactly where it had been left. But her hands moved on the wheel before the thought could settle. The tires rolled onto the gravel. The house came into full view again. Unchanged. Still. Waiting in a way that didn't feel like waiting. Lillian parked and sat there, engine off. The silence pressed in. No music. No movement. Just the faint ticking of the engine cooling down. She stepped out slowly. The air felt sharper than it had 2 days ago. Cooler. More defined. She walked up the path. The porch boards creaked again beneath her feet. The same familiar sound that now felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's memory. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. She pushed it open. Inside, everything held its place. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. Even the light seemed to fall exactly where it had before. Lillian stepped in without hesitation this time. There was no pause at the threshold, no moment of wondering whether she belonged, because she already knew the answer. She moved through the living room, her eyes passing over objects she recognized without needing to look directly at them. The bookshelf she had anchored to the wall, The small crack near the baseboard she had meant to fix, but never did. Everything still carried her touch, but none of it held her name. Upstairs, she gathered what she could. Clothes, a few personal items, a small box of photographs she hadn't yet sorted through. Each thing went into the suitcase without much thought. She didn't linger. There was nothing upstairs she needed to stand in front of. Nothing that would answer the questions that had started forming. When she came back down, she paused at the bottom of the stairs. The kitchen sat to her left, still, familiar, unchanged. Her feet moved before she made a decision. She stepped inside. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in the way spaces feel when they no longer open themselves to you. The window still held the light at the same angle. The counter still carried that faint sheen from years of careful cleaning. The smell was still there. Rosemary. Varnish. Something clean. Something lived in. Lillian walked toward the stove. Her hand reached out, almost without thinking, brushing lightly against the edge of the counter. The surface was cool, solid. Real. She turned slightly and looked at the drawer beside it. Second one down, the one she had used more than any other. It was where she kept things she needed often. Small tools. Notes. Receipts she hadn't sorted yet. And one folded piece of paper. Blue. Worn at the edges. She hadn't thought about it in years. Not really. But now it came back clearly. Rose's handwriting. Careful. Steady. 7 words she had never fully understood. Lillian reached for the handle. Pulled. The drawer slid open with a soft, familiar sound. She looked inside and stopped. Empty. Not disorganized. Not half-cleared. Empty. Completely. The space where everything had once been. Gone. Wiped clean. Lillian stared at it for a long moment. Her hand rested on the edge of the drawer, fingers lightly curled. She didn't move. Didn't breathe any differently. Just looked. Because something about it didn't feel accidental. Drawers didn't empty themselves. Not like this. Not this completely. Not this deliberately. She reached inside slowly, her fingers brushing against the bare wood smooth. Unmarked. No dust. No forgotten corner of paper tucked away. Nothing. The note was gone. The receipts she had kept separate from Conrad's system. Gone. Everything that had lived in that drawer. Removed. Carefully. Intentionally. Lillian pulled her hand back. Closed the drawer. Then opened it again. As if something might have returned in the space between. It hadn't. The emptiness held. She straightened slowly. Her eyes moved across the kitchen, the counter, the sink, the window. Everything still exactly where it belonged. Except the one place that mattered. The one place that held something she hadn't realized she would need. Her mind began to move differently now. Not just remembering, not just questioning, connecting. That drawer. The papers at the lawyer's office. The signatures. The language. The word. Clean. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the ownership. It was the record. The parts of her that could have been pointed to. Proven. They hadn't been overlooked. They had been removed. Lillian took a slow breath. The air in the kitchen felt thinner now. Not because anything had changed. Because she had. She turned away from the drawer. picked up the suitcase she had left near the door. Her movements were steady, measured, not rushed, but not lingering either. At the doorway, she paused once more, not to look back at the room, but to listen. The house made the same sounds it always had. The quiet hum, the faint shift of wood, the stillness. Nothing in it acknowledged what had just been taken. Nothing in it marked the absence, because absence didn't leave a sound. It just remained. Lillian stepped out onto the porch. The screen door pulled closed behind her with that same soft drag. This time the sound felt final. She walked to her car, set the suitcase inside, closed the door. Then she stood there for a moment, her hand resting on the roof. The key pressed lightly against her coat pocket. Still there. Still untouched. Still unexplained. But for the first time, it didn't feel like something extra. It felt like the only thing left that hadn't been erased. Lillian got into the car, started the engine, and drove away, not looking back. Because now, there was nothing inside that house that could prove she had ever been the one who built it. The road out of the neighborhood curved gently past trimmed hedges and evenly spaced mailboxes. Lillian kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, driving at the same steady speed she always had. Nothing rushed, nothing chased her. That made it harder. The car's engine hummed low beneath her, a familiar sound that should have felt grounding. Instead, it filled the space with something hollow, like a conversation that had ended but hadn't quite stopped echoing. She reached the stop sign at the end of the street, paused, looked left, looked right. The world beyond her neighborhood moved like it always did. Cars passing, someone jogging along the sidewalk, a dog pulling at its leash towards something only it could smell. Everything continued, as if nothing had just been taken. Lillian turned right, not because she had decided where to go, because it was the direction she always took when she left the house. The habit remained, even if the destination didn't. The town shifted gradually as she drove. Neat residential blocks gave way to older buildings. Paint chipped along window frames. Signs hung slightly uneven above small businesses that had been there long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. She passed the bakery without thinking, the same one beneath the attorney's office. The smell of sugar drifted faintly into the car as she slowed at a light. For a second, she considered turning, going back, sitting across from those papers again, asking more questions, looking for something she might have missed. But the light changed, and her foot pressed forward. By the time she reached the edge of town, the buildings thinned out. Gas stations, auto shops, a row of storage units with doors in different shades of faded paint. Then open space. Fields stretched out on either side of the road, uneven and wide. The sky seemed larger here, though nothing about it had actually changed. Lillian rolled her window down slightly. The air moved in. Cooler. Carrying the faint smell of earth and something dry. She drove without checking the clock, without checking the mirrors, without checking anything at all, because there was nothing behind her she needed to keep track of anymore. Her phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet sharply, filling the car with a sudden tension that hadn't been there a moment before. Lillian glanced at the screen. Margaret. Her daughter. She let it ring once more before answering. Hello. A brief pause on the other end. Then Margaret's voice, careful, measured. Mom. Yes, I heard from Dad. Of course you did. Lillian didn't say it out loud. She kept her eyes on the road. The fields passed slowly now, the light beginning to shift toward evening. He said everything was finalized, Margaret continued, that the settlement was fair. The word lingered. Fair. Lillian adjusted her grip on the steering wheel. That's what the paperwork says, she replied. Silence. Not long, but long enough to feel. Margaret started, then stopped. I don't want you to make this harder than it needs to be. Lillian blinked. Her gaze didn't waver from the road ahead. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's better to just let things settle. Take what you were given and start fresh. Start fresh. The phrase landed differently than Margaret intended. Lillian could hear it. The way the sentence had been formed. Not entirely her daughter's. Shaped, influenced, clean. She took a slow breath. Margaret, she said quietly, do you remember the kitchen floor before it was finished? There was a pause. I was little, Margaret said. I don't remember much of that. I sanded those boards by hand, Lillian said, for days, because the machine left uneven marks near the edges. Another pause. I didn't know that. I know. The road stretched ahead, empty. Lillian's voice stayed even. Do you remember the garden wall? The one by the side yard? Yes. I thought Dad had that done. Lillian nodded once, though Margaret couldn't see it. I rebuilt it after the winter it collapsed, she said, stone by stone. Silence again, this time heavier. Margaret exhaled softly. Mom, I just think I know what you think, Lillian said, not sharply. Just clearly. She didn't wait for the rest, because she had already heard it. Not from Margaret, from the space between her words. I'll call you later, Lillian added. Okay, Margaret said, her voice quieter now. The line went dead. The car filled with silence again. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight. Lillian drove a little farther before pulling over near a small roadside stop. A single bench. A trash can. A view of nothing in particular. She turned off the engine. The sudden stillness pressed in. For a moment, she just sat there, hands resting on the wheel, eyes forward. Then, slowly, she reached into her coat pocket. Her fingers closed around the key. Cold, solid, unchanged. She pulled it out and held it in her palm. The metal caught a sliver of light from the fading sun. Lillian turned it slightly, studying the worn edges, the way the surface had smoothed over time from being handled. Not recently. Long ago. She hadn't thought about it in years. Not really. But now it stood out. Because everything else had been removed. The drawer, the papers, the pieces that could have told her side of the story. Gone. This had been left. She frowned slightly. Not in confusion, in focus. Her mind moved differently now. She wasn't just remembering Rosa's words. She was listening to them again. Carefully. There's a place. Past the mountain road. Beyond the town where the gas station closes before dark. You won't find it unless you're looking for it. Lillian exhaled slowly. Her eyes lifted from the key to the road ahead. There was no map, no written directions, just memory. And something else. A feeling she hadn't trusted before. She closed her hand around the key, tightened her grip, then opened it again. Still there. Still real. Still hers. Lillian started the engine. The sound returned, low and steady. She checked the road once, then pulled back onto it. Not turning around, not heading anywhere familiar, just forward. Toward something she hadn't needed before, but now might be the only place left that hadn't been rewritten. The road narrowed as she drove. The lines faded. The fields gave way to trees. And for the first time since she left the house, Lillian wasn't driving out of something. She was following something, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. The road narrowed until the center line disappeared. Pavement gave way to patches of gravel, then back again, as if the county had stopped deciding what the road was supposed to be. Trees closed in on both sides, tall and untrimmed, their branches leaning toward the car like they had something to say, but couldn't quite reach. Lillian slowed. Not out of fear, out of attention. Every turn felt less familiar than the last, though something in the rhythm of the road stirred a memory she couldn't fully place. A curve near a split-rail fence, a rusted sign half hidden behind weeds, the kind of details that only mattered if you were looking for them. She drove past a small town without realizing it at first. A single gas station, dark windows. The sign out front flickered once, then went still. No cars in the lot, no movement anywhere. She checked the time. Late. Past when most places around here would still be open. Beyond the town, the road climbed slightly, then dipped, then turned without warning. Lillian kept going. The key sat in the cup holder beside her now, catching the last of the daylight as the sun dropped behind the trees. She glanced at it once, then back at the road. There was no map, just Rose's voice. Past the mountain road, beyond the town where the gas station closes before dark. You won't find it unless you're looking for it. The car rolled forward, tires crunching lightly over loose gravel. Then she almost missed it. A narrow path broke off to the right, barely visible between two overgrown bushes. No sign, no marker. Just a shift in the way the ground dipped slightly inward, as if it had once been used more often and then forgotten. Lillian slowed, stopped, sat there for a moment, the engine idling. She looked at the path, then at the road ahead. The main road continued, open and certain, even if it led nowhere she needed to be. The path was something else. Uncertain, unmarked. She turned the wheel. The car eased onto the narrow track, branches brushing lightly against the sides as she moved forward. The sound was soft, dry, like something being disturbed after a long time left alone. The trees thickened, the light dimmed. And then the path opened, not wide, just enough. A clearing tucked between the trees, no larger than a modest yard. Lillian stopped the car, turned off the engine. Silence fell quickly, not empty, full. The kind of quiet that carried its own weight. She sat there, both hands still resting on the wheel, her eyes adjusting to the shift in light. Then she saw it. The cabin small, set back just enough to feel hidden, not abandoned. The wood siding had faded into a soft gray, worn by years of weather that had shaped it without breaking it. The roof dipped slightly near one corner. A narrow porch stretched across the front, one side leaning just a fraction lower than the other. Two windows faced the clearing. clouded, not shattered, just untouched. Lillian stepped out of the car slowly. The air was cooler here, damp, carrying the scent of pine and earth that had been left undisturbed for too long. She closed the door behind her without thinking, the sound sharper than she expected. It echoed lightly, then disappeared into the trees. For a moment, she didn't move. She just stood there, taking it in. The place didn't look valuable. It didn't look like something anyone would fight over. It looked kept, but not recently. Lillian took a step forward, then another. The ground beneath her feet felt soft, layered with leaves that hadn't been cleared in years. Each step made a faint sound, the kind that didn't travel far but still felt noticeable in the quiet. As she approached the porch, she slowed. Not because she was afraid, because she was observing. The railing on the left side dipped slightly more than the rest, one of the vertical posts leaning just enough to suggest it had loosened over time. She reached out and touched it. The wood was rough beneath her fingers, weathered but still solid. Her eyes moved to the front door. A lock sat in the center. Old iron, darkened with age. No sign of recent use. No scratches, no fresh marks. Lillian took the key from her pocket, held it for a moment, compared the shape, not exactly the same, but close enough to make her pause. She glanced around once more. The clearing, the trees, the path she had just driven through. No movement, no sound, just stillness. She stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath her weight, not sharply, but with a slow, drawn-out sound that suggested they hadn't been asked to carry anyone in a long time. She stood in front of the door, lifted the key, hesitated. Not because she doubted, because she understood. This was the moment where something unknown would become real. She inserted the key into the lock. It didn't slide in smoothly. She adjusted it slightly, tried again. This time it fit. The metal resisted when she turned it. The mechanism inside slow to respond after years of stillness. She applied a little more pressure. A soft click. Then another. The lock gave. Lillian held the handle for a moment before pushing the door open. The hinges moved with a low groan, the sound deep and uneven, like something waking reluctantly. Inside, the air was cooler. Dim, but not dark. Light filtered through the windows, just enough to outline the space without revealing everything at once. Lillian stepped inside, paused, let her eyes adjust. The room was simple. One main space, a small bed against the far wall, a narrow shelf with jars lined up in careful rows, a fireplace built from rough stone, the opening blackened from years of use. And near the window, a table. Wood. Worn. The surface marked by time and use in ways that couldn't be polished away. Lillian moved toward it slowly. Her hand hovered just above the surface before she let her fingers rest against it. The wood was smooth in the center, rougher near the edges, not preserved. She glanced around again, taking in the details now. A folded cloth draped over the back of a chair. A small stack of books on the shelf, their spines faded but intact. A kettle resting near the fireplace, stained but not rusted. Nothing here looked abandoned. It looked paused, like someone had stepped away and expected to return. Lillian turned slowly in place, her gaze moving from one object to the next, then back to the table, positioned directly beneath the window, where the light would fall during the day, where someone would sit. Work. Write. Think. She rested her hand on it again, this time more firmly. The surface didn't shift, didn't react. It simply held. Lillian exhaled, a slow, steady breath. This place wasn't what she had expected, but then she hadn't known what to expect. She moved a step closer to the window, looked out at the clearing, the car, the path beyond it, and the trees. Always the trees. For a moment, she stood there without thinking about what came next, without trying to understand. Because something in the stillness of the cabin, something in the way everything had been left, felt intentional. Not forgotten. Not erased. Just waiting. And for the first time since she opened that empty drawer, Lillian didn't feel like something had been taken. She felt like she had arrived at something that had been left for her, even if she didn't yet know why. The cabin held its silence, not empty, not hollow, just steady. Lillian stood near the table a while longer, her fingers still resting lightly on the worn surface. The light through the window had shifted, thinning as evening settled deeper into the trees. Shadows stretched across the floor in uneven lines, catching in the gaps between the boards. That's when she noticed it. Not at first as something important, just different. Her eyes moved slowly across the floor. Most of the boards ran in straight lines, worn evenly from years of use. But one, just slightly to the left of where she stood, held a different color along its edge. Faint. Easy to miss unless you were looking closely. Lillian stepped back, lowered herself carefully to one knee. Her hand hovered over the floor before touching it. The wood felt the same. Old. Dry. But when she pressed lightly near the edge of that board, it gave just a little. Not enough to shift, just enough to respond. She leaned closer. Her breath slowed. The memory came back without effort. Third board. Don't fix it. Her hand moved to the side of the plank, fingers sliding into the narrow gap between wood and frame. She paused, just for a second, then pulled. The board lifted, easier than it should have, as if it had been opened before, as if it had been meant to open. Beneath it, a shallow space revealed itself. Lined with old newspaper, yellowed at the edges, the print faded into something almost unreadable. And inside, a small metal box. Rectangular. Simple. Wrapped in a piece of cloth that smelled faintly of lavender. Lillian stared at it. Her hand rested against the edge of the opening, steady but not tense. She didn't reach for it immediately. Because she understood now, this wasn't just something left behind. This had been placed, intentionally. For a moment like this. She reached in slowly, lifted the box. It was heavier than she expected, not by much, but enough to feel like it carried more than what it showed. She set it gently on the table. The wood beneath it didn't shift, didn't react, just held the weight. Lillian unwrapped the cloth carefully, folding it back piece by piece. The metal surface underneath was cool, unmarked. The lid had no lock, no visible seal, just a simple clasp. She placed her fingers against it. Pressed. The lid opened with a soft, contained sound. Inside, papers, stacked, tied together with a thin string. And beneath them, more. Lillian didn't rush. She lifted the top bundle first. Untied the string slowly, her hands moving with a kind of care she hadn't felt in a long time. The first page was a copy of a check. Her name. Clear. Written in full. The amount, the same number she had seen years ago at Rose's table. Her breath caught slightly. She turned the page. Another document. Bank transfer records. Dates, numbers, all aligning, all pointing to the same thing. Funds, directed, not shared, not joint. Hers. Lillian's eyes moved faster now, not frantic, focused. She picked up the next sheet. A receipt. Then another. Materials, lumber, tile, paint. Each one dated, each one marked, some with notes in the margin. Handwritten, familiar. She froze for a moment, looked closer. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was Rose's. Small notes beside certain entries. Kitchen floor, bathroom tile, porch repair, each one tied to something Lillian remembered doing. Not vaguely, specifically. She set the papers down carefully, reached for the next layer. Photographs, old, edges worn. She lifted one. It showed the kitchen, unfinished, cabinets missing, the walls bare, and there, kneeling on the floor, Lillian, younger, hair tied back, hands covered in dust. Working. She stared at it, not because she didn't recognize herself, because she did, completely. Another photo. The backyard. Stones scattered across the ground, the garden wall half built, her hands mid-motion, placing one piece carefully into place. Another. The front porch. Boards removed, tools spread out. Her standing at the edge, measuring something just out of frame. Each image, a moment. Captured. Held. Not imagined. Not remembered. Proven. Lillian placed the photographs back down slowly. Her hands didn't shake, but something inside her shifted again. Not the confusion from before, not the hollow feeling of loss. This was something else, something sharper. She reached for the final set of papers at the bottom. A folded document, heavier than the others. She opened it. A statement. Typed. Formal. Dated. Signed. Her eyes moved across the words carefully. Not rushing. Not skipping. Every line mattered now. The document outlined the origin of the funds, the intention behind them. Clear language. Unmistakable. Not a loan. A gift. Specifically designated. To her. For the house. Her name repeated, more than once. Not implied. Not shared. Defined. Lillian exhaled slowly. The sound filled the room. The silence shifted. Because now, it wasn't empty. It held something. She looked back at the papers spread across the table. The check. The receipts. The notes. The photographs. All of it, aligned. Not just in memory. In fact. In record. In something that could not be easily dismissed. Her mind moved quickly now. Not in panic. In pattern. She saw it. The documents at the lawyer's office. The missing drawer. The signatures. The way things had been arranged. Adjusted. Cleaned. But this hadn't been touched. Hadn't been removed. Because no one had known it was here. Lillian stood still for a moment. Her hands resting on the table again. This time not lightly, firmly, grounded. The woman who had sat in that office 2 days ago, trying to match her memories to lines of text, felt distant now. Because this didn't need interpretation. It didn't rely on explanation. It existed. On its own. She gathered the papers slowly, not hurried, not careless, stacking them back together with the same precision they had been kept in. The photographs placed carefully on top. The string tied again. Not tightly, just enough to hold. She closed the metal box, set her hand on the lid, and for the first time, she didn't feel like something had been taken from her. She felt like something had been returned. Not the house, not the years, but the truth of what those years had been. And this time, she was the one holding it. Lillian didn't move right away. Her hand rested on the box, fingers spread slightly, as if she needed to feel the weight of it to believe it was real. Outside, the trees shifted in a slow wind, leaves brushing against each other in a quiet, steady rhythm. For years, she had trusted what was said out loud, what was signed, what was presented cleanly, neatly, like it couldn't be questioned. She hadn't realized how much of her life had been rewritten in rooms where she wasn't paying attention. But Rosa had. Rosa had watched, not argued, not warned louder, just recorded. The parts no one else thought to keep. Lillian picked up one of the photographs again. The kitchen, unfinished, her younger self kneeling on the floor, hands covered in dust, building something that didn't exist yet. She looked at that woman for a long moment, then let it back down. Because she understood now. The house had never forgotten her. Only the story had. And stories could be corrected. She closed the lid gently, the sound soft but certain. In the quiet of that cabin, with nothing polished and nothing pretending, she realized something simple. The truth had been there all along. Just not where anyone thought to look. She turned her head slightly, eyes moving toward the door, toward the road she had taken, without knowing exactly why. And for the first time, the question didn't feel like something chasing her. It felt like something she could finally answer. If everything that proved who you were disappeared from the place you built, would you know where to find it again?